Our guest today is Martha Underwood, founder of Executive Estrogen, Director of Software Engineering Transformation at BBVA, and Girl Spring board member. Thank you for being here today with us, Ms. Underwood. I would like to take this time to discuss racial justice and the condition of social unrest that we are living in. So first, I would like to start off by asking, how have you been affected by the current emphasis of racial injustice that was sparked by the murder of George Floyd?
Hi, Springboarders. First of all, thank you for having me. And I'm so happy that we're having this conversation because I think it's so needed. And so how have I been impacted by the murder of George Floyd? So as a mother, the first thing that I felt was anger and a deep sadness because they've played that video on loop over and over again. And I had to just stop watching it because, again, he's 46 years old and he calls out for his mom. So just think about it. You think about your mom. Whenever you need any comforting, whenever you need anything, you know you can run directly to your mom. And here it is, this grown man knowing or feeling like he's going to die, calling out for his mom. And I couldn't help but feel a deep, deep sadness because I have two sons. And having two sons, I realized that that can happen to him. And so then I got into a rage. I was upset. I was, furious because I'm like, how does this continue to happen? This has happened over and over again. And how do we stop it? And so for how it affected me is emotionally, and I'm still dealing with it emotionally, again, because I have boys, on how I let them just walk in the neighborhood because I'm always worried about them, especially with the climate right now, with so many people at a heightened emotional state as we talk through this sensitive issue. But in the end, even after that, and even after feeling rage, feeling sadness, feeling a little depression, I am trying to work through it by educating my boys and by being a part of the conversation. So that's kind of how I'm doing it as an adult, and also just in the areas that I can, because we're working remote right now, so we're not talking to coworkers or friends. I am reaching out to friends, and I have friends reaching out to me, and I am being as open and honest about racial discrimination and about my experience, because if we don't do that, then we can't move forward together. Well, I know what I'm interested in is, you guys are all Springboarders. And I know that the pandemic has stopped us from having to go to school and interrupted our school flow. How has it impacted you guys? How are you talking about this to your friends? And how do you feel about it? Like, how has it impacted you emotionally? Because I know that if it impacted me, as young girls in high school with so much to look forward to and looking at the future, the world is changing before your eyes. So how did it impact you guys? I'd really like to hear that too.
To me, it's really made me think about the people I hang around, because before this all happened, it's you think that everyone believes in the same things or understands that we need justice. And then after the murder of George Floyd, you see people who you used to hang around start to try to justify the murder. And to me, that really opened my eyes to certain people. And it's to me, I'm trying to tell people that they need to become educated in the system that we live in and in the world that we live in. And I think it's just really making me change my environment of people that I hang around.
I do agree with Alexa. For me, for Black Lives Matter and supporting that movement and understanding racial injustice in the country, I have really looked to social media to educate myself, because there's a lot of people out there posting petitions, places to donate, movies and films to watch to educate yourself. So social media has been really instrumental within my education. And I do agree with Alexa. And I think when you see some people silent on this issue, or, people posting beach pictures or things they're doing every single day and not taking a time to use their social media platform for good, to spread information, educate others, really makes you think, how much is this person really dedicating time out of their lives to educate themselves on anti-Black racism? And that that effort to educate yourself on the issue is more important like now than ever, especially with issues with mass incarceration and whatnot. So that's my take on that.
I think to add on to that, it was really amazing to see how quickly the country also united together to fight the issue, because I know that my social media feed was all very supportive and educating posts to raise awareness of the issue, as well as try to combat the issue of racial injustice and systemic racism together.
A phenomenon I've been noticing is it seems like people in my age group are really interested in sharing petitions and links to things, sending me texts about this happened to George Floyd. Can you please sign this petition and this petition? And I've been seeing Instagram accounts pop up that are dedicated to offering links to petitions and places to donate in their bios. And a lot of my friends have been sharing those in their Instagram stories. I think it's really interesting how much kids in my age are thinking about this and trying to spread awareness.
Lydia, I think that that's encouraging, because kids your age are the future. You guys are the future leaders. And it's going to be up to you to be able to help us frame the world that we're going to be living in. And so to Alexa's point earlier, and Alexa and Simidi's point, where we talked about how it's making you question your friends, right? That's a part of matriculating through high school, because you're going to leave some people behind. But in this instance, it's really interesting because you think that you might have shared some of the same values, and being in the same classes and being in the same circles. But when it came down to when it really mattered, when I need you the most to be an advocate for me, to stand beside me, that it became a us versus them. Because instead of just looking at George as a human being, they started to look at him as a victim. To me, I liken it to, someone who might have been sexually abused. At times, they look at that person and say, well, what did she wear? Why did she wear that short skirt? Or why did she put on that short top? Almost as like it justified the sexual assault, which is not the case. Same thing here is, they're like, well, he shouldn't have resisted. When we looked at the video, he didn't necessarily resist. So it's just interesting on how that has happened. So for me, I started to look deeper into that, to say, why do people feel the need to try to almost taint the image of the victim, especially when it comes to Black people? So we're talking about this issue, especially when it comes to Black people. And I really think it ties back to how Black people have been dehumanized for such a long time. And it's gonna take a long time for us to change that mentality. So it's very refreshing to hear Ariel and Lydia say that their social media platforms or their social media feeds have been overwhelmingly positive, to where you have people saying, here are a lot of the organizations that you can donate money to, because we understand that it's going to take a lot of economic power to help change some of the systematic issues that exist. And then Ariel saying, how quickly the world came together. So that was the other thing that I was very impressed with. It was not just the United States, it was global, because racism is experienced globally. And the fact that it's now a global conversation makes me feel hopeful for it, but we still have a long way to go. I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, so I'll kind of dive into it. I'm going to ask you guys this, and then I'm going to give you my opinion on it, because I'd like to get your take from your point of view. So what are some of the things that you believe are the cause of racial injustice?
To me personally, I think some of the causes to racial injustice are it's really ignorance, and also it's human nature to not want to be wrong. So how earlier you were talking about, we always want to paint this bad image of the victim. So like I think people try to do that because they don't want to just be like, oh yeah, he got murdered, just because they want to like say he got murdered because he was like doing this. So they like make up this story that like paints like a bad image.
Suniti, what do you think?
I think racial injustice can be traced all the way back to when race was formed as a social construct. When I learned about it in class, I took a political theory class. Basically, racism had its start when Christopher Columbus came to the Americas. And in order to pursue profit, he created this racial hierarchy, putting those who were indigenous and those who were Black at the bottom. And so in order to pursue profit, because at the same time, these Europeans they realized that indigenous people and Black people were humans, but they needed some sort of propaganda, some sort of belief to help their pursuit of profit. And so they would come up with all this negative propaganda to indigenous people and Black people so that they can maintain that racial hierarchy and maintain that pursuit of profit.
Yeah, I think the root of racial injustice kind of ties back to our history and how years of racist policies and redlining and gentrification has led to this belief that African Americans are concentrated in more crime-ridden areas, but the reason why that is because of a history of systemic racism. So I think that really plays into how in modern days, a lot of people have hidden biases, and that those biases is what drives them to be discriminatory and to ultimately make racist comments.
I agree that from what I understand, it seems like there's a big historical context to this. I haven't been in the world that long, but I've been trying to do research, especially recently. And I read an article recently that said, it was talking about when we first had indentured servants, white indentured servants, a lot of them from Ireland. Well, there was kind of a shortage of the labor. And when African slaves were brought in, there was a hierarchy that was created where the white indentured servants got more power and more status and they got more privilege, and they were able to see themselves as higher up on a social kind of ladder almost, whereas before they were at the bottom of society in America. And I think that's a huge start of the foundation of how we started there and got to where we are today.
Absolutely agree with that. There is definitely a historical context here, right? And I think it's the trailing impact of slavery. So we started with Christopher Columbus creating this hierarchy, and then we went into slavery. And from there, the laws and the policies that were created during this time of slavery were really meant to dehumanize Black people. It was written into the law that they were 3/5 of a man, not even looked at as a whole person. And when you write that into the law, we as humans, we don't want to necessarily want to hurt someone else. So by looking at it from a systematic standpoint and saying, hey, we need to put into policy, into law, let's define what a Black person is. And when they defined them as 3/5 of a man, it made it easier for anyone, white Americans or anyone else, to look at Black people as less than and therefore treat them that way. And that trailing impact in our laws and in our policies, because we have not really done a holistic change of our laws and policies in the United States, continues to plague Black people and keep them at a disadvantage economically. And that's where I think the issue is, because it started back in historical days with Christopher Columbus with the pursuit of economic power and legitimate hierarchy power. And it still exists today. And one of the things my husband and I were talking about this the other day when we were talking to our sons, when we said, this is how important it is to be involved and understand the laws. Like, Mississippi didn't ratify the 13th Amendment of the legislation that officially banned slavery until 2013. Just think about that. 2013, it was still on the books. So in 2013, slavery was still legal in Mississippi. If you look at the books, just look at the laws on the books. And so that continues to be an issue. So if we don't look at it from a systematic standpoint to say we need to understand our local laws, our state laws, our regional laws, and our national laws, and not just look at it from a national perspective, that's when we can now step ladder and make some of the changes that need to be made in order for us to realize that everyone is human and everyone just wants to live a good, happy life, at the end of the day. Everyone wants the same opportunities to basically be the master of their life. They want to go to college. They want to get a good job. They want to not fear when their children or their husbands or their brothers or their cousins leave their homes. They want to be able to trust that the police officers are there to really help and not be afraid of the people who are put into these positions to help communities thrive. Like, you're supposed to call 911 for help, and now you're afraid to because of what may happen as a Black person. So that, I think, is one of the main things, is the laws and the policies. But I also think, and I'm going to be talking about this because it's fascinating. It's fascinating to me how the impact of imagery in digital and in media plays into that. Because when you look at how Black people are portrayed in movies or commercials, and you go back to the 1800s, to the coon caricatures and blackface, and you never really see Black people in leadership positions in some of these movies or some of these shows on TV or commercials or anything else. You don't necessarily see them, doctors. I know I didn't see them growing up. And that informs how we view people, right? Sometimes. And I think, so when you get down to from the systemic level to the individual level, that's the other thing that we're going to have to hurdle, is Black people are going to continue to need to tell their stories and share those stories so that we can help other races understand the issues that might be unique to us to help us solve those. But I think imagery is going to be a big thing. And I'm happy to see that some of that is starting to change. And I always laugh and joke with my friends to say that the show 24, and I'm not sure, you guys might be too young to know the show 24 with Jack Bauer, but when it first came on, they had a Black president, David Palmer. He's the Allstate guy with the deep voice that everyone loves. But I think that show was critical to helping the people in the United States accept a President Obama, because it showed a Black man in a presidential role. He was beloved. I think when he was killed off, all of the blogs and everything else, everyone was mourning him like he was the actual president, right? And so that shows the power of imagery. That shows the power of media. And I think those are the things that that we will need to look at, and those are the things that we'll need to change to help us at the individual level as well as the systematic level.
I definitely agree with that. I think it was important for us to look at it from, like you said, a historical point of view. And I would also like to ask, how do you think systemic discrimination influences our country?
I'd say mainly through the distribution of wealth, right? And I know we talked about this. And that's through access to education, access to health, access to housing. In this country, we've had a long history of employment discrimination. That's why they had to create the affirmative action act, right? To make sure that Black people who were educated had the opportunity to get into jobs, good paying jobs, so that they can take care of their families. Because if people can't get jobs, they can't pay their bills, they can't buy food, they can't pay for housing, and that creates the cycle of, or this perception that they need to get on to government assistance, and then that's perpetuated, right? But they don't want to. They've tried to get into these jobs, but because of the distribution of wealth and the power control, the decision makers who's allowing, or the gatekeepers who are allowing people in to some of these positions, aren't letting them in. That's going to continue to feed the systematic discrimination, and it's going to continue to influence. And then also in the justice system with the mass incarceration, Black men and Black people in general are more likely to be punished more severely for the same crime. Like, let's just look at Dylan Roof. Do you guys know who Dylan Roof is? Dylan Roof is the young white boy who murdered 9 people at Bible study in Charleston, South Carolina. So he walked into the church under the premise that he wanted to have Bible study with the congregation, and sat there for a while, and then opened fire with a rifle and killed 9 of them. He walked out and he evaded the police officers for a while, but when they finally caught up to him, they took him to Burger King to eat a burger. They sat him next to the patrol car, gave him Burger King's Whopper or burger or whatever it was, and a drink, then handcuffed him, and then put him into the car. Now let's compare that to George Floyd, who allegedly presented a counterfeit $20 bill. He's dead. Dylan Roof killed 9 people in cold blood and admitted to it. Got taken to Burger King, got taken to jail. George Floyd did. That's why it's such a problem, and that's how it influences our country. It continues to influence our country because we're taking away from our workforce. There's so much creative genius and diversity, right? There's so much. So all of the different races have so much to bring to the table, but we aren't even tapping into any of that because of our assumption that person of color is not as good as we are, right? And so therefore we need to punish them more harshly, or they're not as intelligent, or they don't understand, economics or business, or they're not as creative. It will continue to keep us last in the world. We're a part of a global economy, and I think speaking from a U.S. perspective, if we don't correct this soon, or work on it, or see how we can get advanced together, then we will look like the third world country. Right. So that's how I think it's influencing our country, and hopefully this moment we can all capture and talk about the solutions to move us forward.
As you have articulated, Ms. Underwood, how prevalent anti-Black racism and discrimination is in America, and its overwhelming presence within the American economic system and the justice system and many other systems as well, what do you think are the benefits and consequences of questioning and challenging the social order?
So I'm going to start with the consequence, and then then I'll go to the benefits. And I'm actually going to use Colin Kaepernick as an example of a consequence, because he stood for what he knew, right? And he saw this happening from Trayvon Martin all the way down to, Freddie Gray and all of the other names of people who died at the hands of police brutality. And he quietly protests that. And yet he was demonized for doing so, right? And he had to, as a consequence, he had to basically give up his career and have all of these negative things said about him. He hasn't worked in years. So it impacted him financially. But he believed so strongly in that the benefit that we're now seeing is going to be social progress, right? Because if he didn't do it, we wouldn't have anything to tie it back to say, look at the historical aspect of it. It wouldn't be as much of a highlighted conversation at this moment, because they probably look at it more like another isolated incident. But by him making that sacrifice, it showed the systematic nature of it, that it continued to happen. This is the same story we've seen over and over again. So the benefit is social progress, because if we don't have people like Colin Kaepernick, like the Rosa Parks, like the Malcolms and the Martins and the Angela Davises and all of these people, we would still be segregated. We'd still have slavery. If we didn't have Harriet Tubman, we'd still be in slavery. We'd still be segregated. We'd still have a lot of these issues. And so the benefit to us questioning it and challenging it is social progress for all of us as a human race. And I think we need to stay the course. Now, some of us will have to make some personal sacrifices, like Colin did, and like all of the other civil rights leaders and the allies some of them paid the ultimate price, lost their life. But they did it with the hopes of something better on the other side for their children and for their grandchildren. And so for me, hands down, the benefit, and that why we have to keep pushing, is because of the social progress that will come out of it for all of us.
So on the topic of social progress, I wanted to ask, how can we as individuals or as a group positively bring about change in regards to racial justice?
So we touched on it earlier, is you have to be active and you have to vote. Like, you need to understand the politics of your local government, of your state government, and of, national government. You can't just say, okay, I'm just going to vote in the presidential election, because I think that that's what's typically highlighted. But you have, all of these elected officials, the sheriffs in towns, the mayors, all of that make a difference to change policies for our communities. And the best way that we can do it is start within your sphere of influence, which is your local government. You can even start in your schools. How can we start a club? Like, can we start a club and let's study anti-racist vocabulary? Let's read, some of the books that they have, and let's educate ourselves, and let's become an ally to Black people in class. If we see something, we say something, right? And if you continue to do that, even if you're the first, being the first is hard, but being the first means you're a leader, and typically people follow. And I think that's the way that we can positively bring about change. Because again, like I said earlier, honestly, I didn't want to talk about this, because we talk about it as Black people, we talk about it all the time, right? But I realize I have to, because if I don't, how will people learn? Yeah, we talk about it internally, but we have to talk to each other. We have to educate each other and talk about our perspectives and come to the middle to see how we can come to compromises and move forward together. But we do that from a policy perspective by voting, and then we do that from a social perspective by our actions. And that's where we can do that. And I know there's been a lot of conversation with you guys on social media. What have you seen some of the individuals doing? I know that we talked about, Lydia talked about how there was a lot of shares on these are the organizations that you can donate to. What else have you seen that made you feel positive about things that you can do to help towards change racial justice?
Well, to me, one of the most important things I keep seeing is the emphasis that we don't need to be quiet, because there's I read this article and it was if we be quiet, we'll just stay in the same place that we're in. And I think one of the things that we as teenagers should do is talk to our friends and like tell them that this isn't okay. Like the ones that believe that we can just let it go away, we need to like bring it to attention that this is a serious issue and it's not something that's just going to blow over by being quiet.
And that's key, Alexa, is using our voices to help them understand. Because if we're quiet, then they won't understand how we're feeling, what our perception is, what our experience is, and what needs to be done to change it. So we definitely have to continue to use our voices.
In Birmingham, there's been a lot of protests, and some of my friends have reached out to me and asked, hey, there's a protest tomorrow, do you want to go with me? And I've seen people post about it on social media. The posters that they made, how long they stayed, and what impact it had. Absolutely sharing these things on social media and going to protests and speaking and yelling about it and feeling angry is okay. I think voicing your thoughts and voicing what you want to see change is really important. And it's definitely something that I've been able to see recently.
Yeah, it's true, because the protest is another way to use your voice, right? And what we're seeing, when you said voicing the anger, is the what's coming out is people have been so frustrated and quiet for so long, and it's been like a pressure cooker, right? And with the pandemic, everyone had to be inside. So you had a lot of anxiety around pandemic and anxiety around the economy because everything had to be closed, anxiety around school, sports, jobs, college. What does my future look like? Am I going to have to stay home and do this on, go to college online? Or what does high school look like? All of this. So you had all of that emotional stress and pressure. And then you had this another instance of police brutality, which then blew it all up. And I think, with the protest, what we saw was just everyone's frustration with the racial injustice that continues to happen, compounded with the fear and anxiety around the pandemic. But the protest needed to happen in order to affect change from a racial perspective, make sure we can change the systematic racism that happens all the time, that's been in this country for forever. And so, yes, so it's good to see that young people are raising their voices through the protests as well, because protests have been successful in the past. But what I would like to say too on that is what's next after the protest, because I would say that the protest is a visual representation of our voices, our united collective voices. You show, the powers that be, that we are a united front. We are all standing side by side as brothers and sisters, black, white, yellow, green, it doesn't matter. We're all here using our voices. But then what's next? That's when you have to start looking at how do we make the changes by using our voice through voting, changing the people who's in leadership that can think more on a communal view instead of a single view of this is just what's good for me or one group, and make those systematic changes. And it's just like brick by brick, we're going to have to build that and work through that. So that's one of the things that through the protests, how do you convert that energy into something actionable? Look at what's passionate, look at what laws need to be changed, work with the group and say, we back, you on changing this one thing. And you can do it at the school level. You can do it at all kinds of levels. You can start with something as simple as, and I'm not sure what school everyone goes to, but you can start as simple as, look, we need more Black teachers, or we need more Black administrators. So we can, have a more diverse perspective of people teaching us. It could be something as simple as that, to say, okay, we're going to band together, because I've gone through school and I've never had a Black teacher. that also falls into the imagery, right? Of being able to learn from people that don't look like us and get different perspectives. So make sure that, when we're looking at these things, is how do we take that energy and convert it into action?
I believe that sometimes, like, while people are protesting or when they're seeing protests, they don't really, like, have the main goal in mind. And, like, to me, the overall goal is to, like, finally one day have a system where we have perfect racial justice. And I feel like sometimes that, like, idea gets lost. So I want to ask, what would a society that practiced perfect racial justice look like to you?
So I don't want to even look at it as perfect racial justice. It's how do we just treat each other as humans? We need to shed what, Christopher Columbus started with this hierarchy, with introducing this idea of race. We're all part of one race, the human race. And if we can just all treat each other as humans and be considerate of everyone, then that's when we would get to a society where we can all thrive, right? And so one of the things that we can start doing individually is to shed our assumptions and to try to challenge our subconscious biases by doing a deep self-examination of, what do I really think? Like, what have I been shown? Again, the imagery comes into play. Like, what have I been shown as a young child and continue to see over and over again and continue to experience that makes me feel this way about a Black woman or about a Black man? Like, start looking at that and start examining that, and then try to reverse that by replacing that with positive images and reaching out to people who don't look like you to understand their experiences. And I bet you what you're going to find is you're more alike than you're different. So, we're all girls. We're all quiet. It's girl talk, right? There are a lot of things that we as women and as girls, we have experienced and we can talk through. I like hair, nails, different things that we bond over. It's the same thing. It does, just because I have Black skin doesn't mean that it's different. We're all humans. And we have a different, Black women and people have a different experience because of the hierarchy structure and this idea of race that had been introduced into our society that now we need to work on and shed. And I told my sons the other day, and they laughed about this because they're always talking about, if we can go 80 years into the future or 100 years into the future. And I said, well, I don't, I might not be around, but I would love to look back and then man, what were they thinking? Like, that's what they were doing back then? That's crazy. Like, why would they discriminate against you because you're, Black? Or why would they do that? And wouldn't it be awesome to look back and look at it as how ridiculous it was? Because we do some of that now when we look back at slavery. And we look at it and we're like, really? Like, this is what we were doing to another human being? Like, this is how we were treating babies? This is how we were separating families? Like, all of these things that we see a little bit of in our society today, that we can definitely use our voices to say, this cannot happen again. We are all humans. How do we treat each other as such and have the respect and consideration for our fellow humans, and just shed the assumptions and try to get to know them? So get uncomfortable and reach out to people who don't look like you. Have the uncomfortable conversations. Challenge some of your beliefs. Doesn't mean that you have to agree. Doesn't mean that you have to change it, but challenge them. Ask the questions and really try to get to know someone. And like I said, you will most likely find that you're a lot more similar than you are different.
I think what you said was really nice. I really liked how you ended what you were saying with realize we're a lot more similar than we are different, because I think that is very true, because now a lot of people think we're separated by our differences without having the conversations to get to know each other and find those similarities, because of course people would seem different if you didn't get to know them as a person.
Yep. Indeed. Like I'm kind of happy that for me, the beach has been canceled for me because I cannot put on anyone's bathing suit right now with all of the pounds that I've gained in this quarantine. So I'd like to be a resource for you girls. So if there's any question that you ever have that you might be afraid to ask anyone else, you can always come ask me. That's the one thing that I think that more of us need to do is try not to judge the questions that are being asked, because I think that prohibits some of the conversations from happening because people are afraid. And if you ask a question, people are judged. Like, how do you not know that? Or why are you asking me that? Like, that's a dumb question. Well, no question is dumb because we're all getting to know each other. Right? It's not like you've been immersed in it and you just automatically know. There's things that I still need to learn. And I'm always cognizant of that. Like, we don't know it all. And so if there's ever any question or anything that you want to know or get a perspective on, I'm always here. Feel free to email me and to ask. My email is martha@executiveestrogen.com. And I can get it to everyone, and you can probably put it in the show notes for this podcast, but I'm always open to having the conversation because I think that that's critical. You need to be able to have a safe place to ask the questions in order to grow. Because if you don't, then you don't ask the questions and you stay ignorant of whatever it is that you're trying to seek more information on. So I'll end it with that. Just use me as a resource.
That means a lot. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you all for tuning into our podcast. We hope that you found it very informative and that you leave today with open minds and open hearts to improve the overall condition of racial justice. We would like to thank our guest, Martha Underwood. Please visit our website, girlspring.com, to view articles and resources on racial justice, Black Lives Matter, and more articles created by girls for girls. Thank you.